Hi, my name is Sterling, and you're learning American English with me. What I'm doing with this video is I'm creating a video version of some classes I'm going to give in person. And if you're interested, if you are at an intermediate level of English and you can understand what I'm saying now, these are the kind of lessons that I could be giving you to help you improve your fluency in English. So today I'm going to talk about auxiliary verbs, all of them except for to do. To be is the primary auxiliary verb. I am, you are, we are, they are, he, she, it is. And the rest of the auxiliary verbs are sometimes called modal verbs. And when you use these modal verbs in front of another verb, it changes the meaning or the intention of the action of that verb. And the great thing is, for you Spanish speakers, this is all true in Spanish. Maybe you don't think about it. Part of the learning process to help you learn English would be to review how these grammatical things work in Spanish, because generally they work the same, and that can help you learn how to speak English well. One thing that all these auxiliary verbs have in common is that there is no use of the auxiliary verb do with any of these verbs. In positives, in negatives, in questions, it's not possible to use the auxiliary verb do with these verbs. So the only thing that changes when you form a question using these auxiliary verbs is the word order. The subject comes first for a statement, and the auxiliary verb comes first for a question. You'll see that in examples which I covered in a previous video. I'm not going to talk about question and statement formation in this video. I'm just going to explain the auxiliary verbs, and then I'm going to give you a contextual example of how you use these things in daily conversation, which will probably be a little bit more interesting than this dry material. But here is kind of a summary of the modal verbs. We have can or could. We have may or might. We have shall or should. We have will or would. And we have a couple of other things. Had better and ought to, which you may or may not be familiar with. Don't worry, if you're not familiar with them, I'm going to show you some examples. But let me talk about can and could. The choice between can and could depends upon past or present. The textbooks are going to tell you that you can only use can in the present tense, and that you use could in the past tense. The truth is, in actual practice, you can use can or could to represent the present, but in the past, you're going to have to use the word could. So, as I said, these ideas are true in Spanish. So, an idea that's going to help you understand can and could is that you would say podria when you need to use the word could. Likewise, you would say yo puedo, then you're going to use the word can. In a subjunctive kind of a feeling, when you would say yo pueda, then in English, you need to say you might be able to, or you could be able to, because there is no subjunctive tense in English, and this additional use of the word might as an auxiliary to can kind of best represents that subjunctive idea. So it's can or could in the present tense, could in the past tense. Let me give you an example. I can run 1 kilometer every morning. That's in the present. I could do that and it would be my choice. That's in the present. But when I was younger, I could run 10 kilometers every morning. That's in the past. So I had to use could, and it makes no sense. And once again, the textbooks are going to tell you that you cannot use could in the present tense. I'm telling you that people use it that way all the time, and that it doesn't sound strange to use could as a present tense in common use as a modal verb, even if it breaks the rules of English. I don't care. This is how people talk. However, you must use could in the past tense because it's the only word that would make any sense in the past tense. May or might, that's the next set of words. Technically, again, may is present tense, might is past tense. And you'll see more of that in some examples, but in actual conversation, may and might are interchangeable. Even though the textbook might say this is formally wrong, I'll repeat that same note. The textbooks will tell you that you cannot use might in the present tense. I'm telling you, people use it that way all the time, and it does not sound strange to use might in the present tense. However, if you're going to talk about the past tense, you must use might, and you can't use may because it will not make sense in the past tense. So here's an example. I may go to the store. Yeah, there's a good possibility that I might go to the store. That's present tense. But yesterday, when I thought about it, I thought I might go to the store, but I didn't. The past tense requires the use of might. You would be totally misunderstood if you said may in the past tense. Must have to, and had to. These are requirement kind of modals. The difference between must and have to is kind of a level of how serious are you? How emphatic do you need to be? Must sometimes sounds kind of awkward, and it's generally used in the context of needing to say something very strong, like in obeying a law. For example, I have to go to the store, and I have to pay my rent, and I have to pay all my bills this month. These are the things I have to do to live a normal life. But if a situation becomes urgent, then you can express the same idea with must. For example, if you don't want to have an accident, you must stop at the traffic light. That's a little more urgent. Or for example, my annual tax report is due on April 15th. So in January, I know I have to do my tax report soon. But if I procrastinate, if I delay, and on April 14th, I still have not done the tax report, I know I must do it the next day. The next set of modal verbs is shall and should, and the same logic of present and past applies to shall and should. Shall or should can be used in present tense. Even if the textbooks say you can't use should in present tense, you can, and people do. All the time, it's normal. So technically, shall is for the present tense. However, in modern conversation, at least in American English, shall is kind of rarely used, and it kind of sounds old-fashioned. It sounds antiquated. If we do say shall, we might use it in a question, and that sounds a little less antiquated. But we would rarely say it in a statement. Let me give you an example. Shall I go to the store? In question form, that sounds normal. People more often might say should. Should I go to the store? It means the same thing. The use of shall includes a sense of intention, and sometimes the use of should includes more of a sense of like the best possibility. But to say in statement form, I shall go to the store, that sounds like you're living in 19th century England. It's just people don't talk that way. But you might use it in a question. Shall I go to the store? But you would never say, I shall go to the store, because you just don't talk that way in the United States or Canada. Will and would. Again, technically, will is used in the present tense and would in the past, in kind of a conditional sense. But there's a little more to will and would than with the other ones. Would can also be used in the past tense as a replacement for used to. You would say solía ser in Spanish. It depends on the context of the use, what would mean. I will go to the store. That indicates intention as well as the future tense. Sometimes one, sometimes both. It depends on the context. You have to speak a lot of English to understand that. I would go to the store can mean I would go if this or if that. I would go as a possibility. Or it can be telling a story in the past, like when I was a young man, I would smell the flowers. Something I used to do. That's another use of would. Two other expressions are had better, which is more or less equivalent to should. You'd better do this. You should do this. Had better is sometimes used in kind of a scolding manner, like a warning. You'd better do this, or there will be consequences. And you ought to is also more or less equivalent to better, to had better or should, but you ought to is more of a suggestion than had better. Like, you really ought to get that fixed. So that ran on kind of long. I want to give you this story and context, which you're going to find a little more entertaining. And I hope you made it to this point in the video so that you will go on to part 2 and listen to the story, which I think is a little more fun and is going to help you be able to learn to retain these things in your mind. So thank you for watching this video. If you would like to subscribe to this channel, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button right now. And I will see you all in the follow-up video. Bye-bye.